All right, this morning our plan is to finish up chapter 31 and get into my favorite chapter of the book of Genesis, Genesis 32. So if we can quickly get into the conclusion of 31, I'll be excited to get into 32 this morning. So let's go ahead and read together Genesis 31, beginning in verse 43 through the end of the chapter. I'm going to read out of the English Standard Version. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, and the children are my children. The flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters, or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap. And they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named it Gilead. And Mizpah, for he said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives beside my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." Then Laban said to Jacob, "See this heap and the pillar, which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. And Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned home. God bless the reading of his word. All right. Let's talk about Jacob's covenant. Laban is lost. Jacob has said his piece. But what's so interesting coming into the verses that we just finished reading together is that nothing has changed for him. Why all this light? He's not seeking the Lord. He's not asking for forgiveness. He's not saying, "Hey, can I go along with you?" His heart remained unchanged. Then we came to verse 43. And the statement, was it not a very interesting insight into Laban's attitude? Look at this again. The daughters are what? My daughters. The children are my children. The flocks are? and all that you see is. But what can I do this day to my daughters or to their children whom they have borne? You know what he sounds like to me? He sounds like me at 4 years old when I would say, it's mines. It's mines. It's all mines. I don't know why I used it plural, but I did. I'm serious. That was my statement, 4 years old. It's mines. It's mines. It's mines. What's that? They're plural things. That's right. I never forget my neighbor, Connie and Larry Thompson. Jonathan, there's no such word as mines. Yes, there is. It's mines. It's my word. But I mean, seriously, Laban, my. I mean, his heart's just unchanged. What's that? It's all about him. So he settles for the best that he can get today. He's always negotiating. He settles for a covenant with Jacob. And as you notice, it's symbolized by a pillar, a heap of rocks, and it's really a covenant, what we would call a non-aggression covenant, okay? A non-aggression covenant. And he said, I know the Lord is with you. What I want from you is now a promise that you're never going to do what, class? That you're never going to come back and hurt me. And then we came to verse 48. This heap is a witness between you and me this day. And then verse 49, may the Lord watch between you and me when we're absent from one another. That what? If you what? Mistreat my daughters, and here's a big one, or if you take wives besides my daughters, which that's a little gray area. Well, we could talk about that, but I don't know if I want to. Although no man is with us, God is witness between you and me. Laban says to Jacob then in verse 52, this heap is a witness and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass this heap to you to harm you, and you will not pass this heap or this pillar to me to harm me. This division, class, between Laban and Jacob is seen one more time. It's seen in how this covenant is ratified between the two men. In verse 53, it's amazing how it goes back to the forefathers, right? The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. It's so interesting that Laban is willing to make a covenant in the name of God, as God is the witness. But according to what we've seen in this chapter, he really doesn't have a true relationship with God, does he? Not only does he not have a relationship with God, I don't think he fully yet understands what he's just said. The God of Abraham is not the God of Nahor. Did you know that? Nahor never crossed the Euphrates River when Abraham was called. When Abram was called, you remember back in Genesis chapter 12, we learned from Joshua 24:2, we know that the father probably worshiped the moon god of Ur of the Chaldeans. He wasn't the God the way that Laban describes him, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Look at again, Joshua 24:2. Look at what Jacob does. He doesn't swear by the name of God of Abraham, God of Nahor. He swore by the God of his father, the dread of the father, the dread of Isaac, right? Again, here in Genesis 31. Look at what Jacob does. Again, he doesn't swear by the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor. He swears by the God of his father, the fear, the dread of Isaac. It's just like the world today. The world, let me ask you, does the world ever use God and God's name whenever they think it's going to be an advantage for them? Are they willing to do that? And as soon as they don't see God as an advantage, then what do? He's no use to them, right? I kind of feel that's what's happening here with Laban. He doesn't really have a relationship with him, but he's willing to use him to ratify this covenant so that Jacob does him no harm. What's also interesting about this covenant is the site of this covenant. They are at Mizpah, Mizpah, Mizpah. It's right either on the edge or I think it's on the edge of the promised land. Laban has made a 7-day journey as fast as he could, all the way from Haran to this point, Mizpah. And he gets to the edge, I believe, the edge of the promised land, but he never goes into the promised land. If I understand it correctly, he's right here on the edge of the promised land, but he never enters the promised land. And then, of course, in verse 55, we saw early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his sons and his daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. And as this scene closes, I think the thing that stands out to me is that Laban is so close to the promised land, so close to the land of promise, and yet, what is it in the game of horseshoes, hand grenades, right? Close counts in horseshoe and hand grenades, is that right? Well, not in the case of the promised land. You don't get credit for being in the promised land unless you're in the promised land. He never goes into the promised land. He's on the edge of the promised land. Any comments or questions in chapter 31? All right, let's shift gears now and let's go into chapter 32. And this morning we're going to look at Genesis chapter 32, beginning in verse 1 and ending in verse 21. So, as we concluded 31 and come into 32, we see Jacob in the promised land. He was on the run until stopped by Laban. He was trying to leave because of the damage that had been done to the relationships around him. In particular, multiple times, not once, multiple times, Jacob has used deceit, lies, and disguises in order to gain the upper hand on his brother, who was whom? Esau. He caused so much damage with no apology that Esau was determined to break him. Now, after a long time, 20 years to be exact, after a long time, we've witnessed him heading back home. Now, let me ask you, class, does time heal all wounds? Not always, no. Sometimes time does have a way of healing wounds, but other times it exacerbates it. Where a seed of bitterness sets, where a seed of bitterness sets over time, it can be watered and grown into something even more ugly, and a spirit of exasperation can take over. Is that true? Yeah. So there is a true sense in what we're going to see today. There is a true sense in this narrative that danger is in the air. We know what happens next, and sometimes we read this narrative and we think, well, Esau, he's always smiling, he's always so nice, and so we kind of minimize this tension. But Jacob hasn't yet met Esau and has no clue that God has blessed Esau in his own way, that Esau is, what I would say, quite happy in his life at this point. But again, Jacob doesn't know that. I call Jacob in this section, I call him running Jacob, because we know he was running from Laban, right? Meets up with Laban. He continues his move back home. But running Jacob has no idea what he's about to face. All he has, quite frankly, is his memories. And those memories make it very clear to Jacob that this is dangerous. This could go horribly wrong. So with that, I have a few truths that I want to share in this class this morning. And the first truth that I want us to see this morning, a very practical point that happens in the manner of transformed lives. And I think by this point, Jacob's life is beginning to transform, if not has already been transformed in some great ways. I think Esau's life has also changed quite dramatically. But in the case of Jacob, the practical point I want to share with you is that, and I hate to say this, but it's true, the effects of past sin, think about it, the effects of past sin, can they still affect your life even after you begin to follow God? Yeah. Now, I say that because I think all of us in this room are aware, at least, that becoming a Christian does not erase every ounce of your past, right? In terms of there could be consequences, hurt relationships, situations that still linger in our past that are unreconciled. Much like we saw in our sermon series with Joseph, right, and his brothers, those unreconciled relationships that had been that way for a very long time. Time did not just effectually heal that situation. But in this case, with Jacob, time has passed in the narrative, and I do believe that Jacob has grown. He still has a lot more growing to do, but he's grown, in my opinion, an awful lot by this point. The fact that when God told him to go home, he did not procrastinate. He did not hesitate. He just went, I think says a lot. He's not the same man that he was, and yet the reality is the past hangs in the air and sets the mood for this whole chapter. You can see some of that in the details that are going on here. You get a sense of an ongoing tension. Look at, let's just read through verse number 3. So if you have your Bible, let's read Genesis 32, 1 through 3. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob." Now stop right there, class. What does Jacob call Esau? My Lord. And how does he refer to himself? Your servant. Now, why is that interesting? Well, I'm not asking why he called him. I'm just asking why is it interesting? Yeah, it's truthfully the other way around. The last time these boys had lived in the same country, Jacob had done everything he could possibly do to be what? The top man, the man on top, the Lord, right? He had done everything. In fact, he had stolen the birthright. He had manipulated the blessing. And both of those were all about doing what? Getting the birthright and the blessing were all about making Jacob what? The top dog. Being Lord, master, the guy on top, and making Esau what? Second. And putting him low, making him the servant of his brother. Even, class, in the wording that's used here, there's this subtle recognition of exactly what wrong he had done. Look as well, let's look at verse number 5. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, and female servants. I have sent to tell my Lord in order that I might find favor in your sight. He calls him what again? Lord, my Lord. But he also appeals for favor. We could translate that mercy, I think is a better word. He's asking for mercy. By the way, if you remember, that's the same word from the Hebrew that's used in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 8. Remember, but Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Or if you go back to Genesis 19, Sodom and Gomorrah, you remember that? And Lot in the middle of that narrative. Lot is a less than honorable character, I will say. He's made a lot of mistakes, and yet we read in Genesis 19 and verse 19, behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. As Lot speaks to the angels that deliver him from that punishment. In other words, Noah and Lot, I really believe, were subjects that received favor, that received mercy, and it had nothing to do with them being just amazingly moral, upright, and righteous individuals. It's not as much about who they are, rather they were subjects of mercy. They didn't get it, I believe, just based on the fact that they were really, really wonderful guys. Although we remember in this case of Noah, he was much more righteous than those surrounding him, a subjective form of righteousness. So here Jacob employs that same language. He's not saying, Esau, I'm your brother, you've got to treat me like a brother. He's not saying that. He's saying, Esau, I've done wrong. All I can do is appeal to your sense of mercy. All I can do is look and hope that you have a merciful disposition that, quite frankly, I've never shown to you. Isn't that amazing? You show me mercy. You be a merciful person, unlike the person I've been to you. That's quite a request, right? Look at verse 6. He received mercy. Yep. Treat me as one of your hired servants. Yep. Talking about the prodigal returning home. All right, verse 6. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. Are you going to laugh at that? That's not the answer we were looking for. That's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear Esau sends his love. He says he'll get with you in a few weeks or so. We'll have dinner. Not what it says, does it? It says, oh, we found your brother, Esau. By the way, he's coming. And I don't know, he's got 400 men coming with him. Now, you tell me, class, what would you think about that? I'm sure you're thinking, oh, it's going to be a great reunion. We're going to have a good old time. How did Jacob know that Esau? I'm sorry, I got distracted. Say it again. Right. Well, if I understand it correctly, the messengers, they deliver the message that Jacob is on his way, and then Esau's response is, I guess I'll go meet him. Yeah. All right. Jacob. Jacob says, I've done wrong. My Lord, your servant, please show me mercy. And news comes back, 400 people are marching toward you. What does that sound like? A party? No, it sounds like an army. In fact, do you remember when Abraham, this came to my mind this past week as I was studying this. You remember when Abraham went to war against the 5 kings? We're told how many people were in the army. Do you remember? Do you remember that number? 318. And he won. This is bigger. This is a big group. These guys aren't out for a Sunday stroll by the river. I mean, they're marching. It sounds so threatening. It sounds so ominous. And so we read in verse 7, Jacob was happy to hear the news and was just excited about the prospects of sitting down and having dinner with his brother. That's not what it says. Oh, it says, then Jacob was what? Greatly afraid and distressed. Well, duh. That's just a normal response to this type of news. He's full of intense fear because he believed a real threat is coming toward him. And you hear about him dividing everything up, trying to come up with a plan, because if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left can what? Escape. He's thinking massacre. He's thinking destruction. And he's thinking it's because he remembers what Esau was like. The impetuous, fierce man. This dangerous man who did things his own way. And I'll tell you, class, he wasn't wrong. Sure did. And he's thinking it because he, is imagining like we do. Sometimes we can imagine our problems. I don't think Jacob, his imagination is getting carried away here, though. I do think sometimes, like, we perceive our problems greater than they really are. Do you know what I mean by that? But I don't think that's really the case here with Jacob. Jacob is looking at the mistakes he's made in the past and reading this situation wisely. This is a dangerous situation. He's coming back. Jacob is coming back to what is a very dangerous mess. But let me ask you, class, who caused the mess? He did. He's coming back to a threatening mess that has resulted because of his past mistakes, because of the sin that he did the last time he was in this land. Now, he is in this moment, I've said it, I believe it, he is in this moment a changed person. But the hurts are still there, right? The problems he created in the past just haven't dissipated. They haven't gone away. The hurt is still there. I think that's not a positive lesson, but I think it's an important lesson for us. When you become a Christian, God doesn't just whitewash all your consequences away. And even as a Christian, if you commit a sin that could potentially have devastating consequences, God forgives you of your sin, but not all the time do we escape the consequences of that sin. Is that true? It's sad, but that's the reality. Sin hurts. Sin leaves its spots. Sometimes when folks become Christians, their initial high in finding Christ dissipates. I've seen this so many times. Like, I've taken people in the baptistry, and you baptize them, and they come out of that baptistry, and they're so happy, and they walk out here, and everybody's hugging them, and they've got a smile on their face, and then they go home. And the same addictions, the same struggles, the same relational problems that they had before they went under the water come right back at them. And they think, what, is this the way it's supposed to go? Because sometimes we as teachers, and I'll put the blame on myself, I don't believe that I always do a good enough job telling people and studying the gospel with them that, hey, this isn't going to whitewash everything that's happened in your life. Now, is it going to take away your sin? Absolutely. But it's not going to take away all the struggles that you're facing in your life. And so I've seen it many times. People, they have this initial high in finding Christ, and then they come to terms and realize the mistakes of their past and the hurts that they've caused. And the consequences of those still remain. Those hurts, those issues still have to be dealt with. Apologies may even need to be given. Things may need to be made right. I think Jacob reminds us that even trouble, I was thinking about this in my own life, trouble from even 20 years ago can still hang in the air and be a problem for you today. Is that true? All right, that's number one. What about number two? And yet, as Christians today, as believers in the case of Jacob, the consequence of sin can still remain and cause trouble as you move forward in life. So our second point is this, because we need to realize we don't battle those things, those consequences. We need to realize we don't battle them alone. You really believe that? I like that. I like that. So are you telling us, Myrna, that Laban was a mirror for Jacob to look in and see a little bit of himself in Laban? Maybe there's some truth in that. Maybe there's some truth about that. And that's a choice that everybody has to make. When God puts you in a moment where you're faced with the reality of who you are, you either accept it or you deny it. And I think Jacob did accept it, yeah. But our second point, again, is that whatever the consequences you may be battling, you're not battling them alone. And I think that changes everything. Let's look back at verse number 1 again. It says Jacob went on his way, but he didn't go alone, did he? What does it say went with him? The angels of God met him. Now, the word angel just means messenger. And this phrase, the angels of God, it reminds us of that vision or dream that he had back in chapter 28, where he dreamt of a ladder between him and God, and ascending and descending on that ladder was what? Angels, that's right. Messengers going between him and God to him, maintaining the connection, maintaining the communication, maintaining the awareness, okay? The point of that vision was to remind Jacob that even as he left, God would be with him. That connection would continue even in the foreign land. He was linked to God. God was going to be involved in his life. In fact, that particular phrase, angels of God, it only appears in 2 places. Here in chapter 32, verse 1, and back in chapter 28 and verse 12. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think that we're meant to see the connection between the 2 times. In other words, Jacob went, he got blessed, and now he goes back and he's terrified about a mess. And God gives him this reminder. Jacob, the connection that we've had all along, you're still going to have it. Still going to be there. You're not alone. Remember, I am God who is with you. And then in verse 2, and when Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. So he called the name of that place, Mahanaim. And that word, by the way, means 2 camps. And the idea, I think, is very simple here. God is here. You've got Camp Jacob, and you got Camp God. And they're joined together. 2 camps, not one, but they're joined. The idea, again, is that Jacob is not alone. The third truth that I want to share with you here, and I think we all should take some comfort in this, is that God hears your prayers. This is probably the most important follow-through of realizing that this is God's camp, that our connection to God for us even today has not disappeared, that in the midst of our anxiety and our worry and our hurts that we don't know how to deal with, that we don't know how to work through, and things that many times we've caused our own selves, the problems we've created for our own selves, we still have a glorious resource. And that resource is prayer. The God who is with us is the same God whose ear is inclined to us. So Jacob here has this heavy sense of the danger that is awaiting him, that his past has created, and he has a clear sense of the reality that God is with me. This is God's camp. So he prays. Man, praise God that we have a mediator between us and God, Jesus Christ, that God hears our prayers, hears our cries. So listen to the prayer. Verse 9. Let me read it to you. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. In other words, he begins his prayer in verse 9 with a focus on who God is. He dwells on the nature of God, of who God is with him. And first of all, he says, God, you got a track record here. You've left a legacy of faithfulness, of greatness You are the God of my father Abraham and God of Isaac. In other words, the God who did so much for Abraham, the God who did so much for Isaac. In other words, this is the same God to whom I'm praying. And then he mentions that special name. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Yahweh. That reminds us of the covenantal relationship, the promise making, the promise keeping nature of God. He's not just Lord over all, rather, he's a God who made a very personal commitment to some, namely Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob. O Lord, my covenant-making, covenant-keeping Lord. And I think that's a recognition. I think that's his way of saying, God, you made promises to me, and I know that you are a God who's faithful to keep the promises that you have made. In other words, Jacob is, I think, and I find this in my own prayer life, sometimes I pray a prayer, and it really is just a reminder for me. Do you know what I mean by that? Like I'm recalling the nature of God in my prayer, and I'm doing it to praise God, but I'm also doing it because it serves as a good reminder to me. And I don't think there's a problem with that. I think Jacob here, it's twofold for him as well. And then in verse 9, he goes even further, and he reminds himself that God has given a very specific command. What was that specific command that he's seeking to obey? Well, look at the end of verse 9. O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. In other words, God, listen, I'm trying to be a better Jacob here. I'm not out on a whim. God, I'm simply doing what you told me to do. I'm trying to trust and obey. I'm trying to follow your word. So this prayer starts out with the nature of God, and then a focus on who God is. And then in verse 10, he acknowledges who he is. And we'll close with this. Look at verse 10, and then we'll end on this, because I think this is a great place to end. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant, who with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Beautiful. Let's close with a prayer. Father, as we close this time together, I pray, Father, that we might see from the things we've studied together how you truly are Yahweh, that you are a God who is with us, that you are a God who directs our steps, that when you give us a command in your word, that we should, like Jacob, faithfully obey that command, faithfully follow your will for our lives, even though sometimes it may lead us into moments where we do face times of anxiety. We may worry about what's around the corner, but let us, like Jacob, remember that we are two camps. The camp is ourself and you, and that you have made us together through your Son, Jesus Christ, reunified us through his blood. Father, I'm grateful that we have the ability today to communicate to you in prayer in the same way that Jacob did, but today with your Son, Jesus, as mediator. And we're grateful, Father, for this time we've had together. Father, let us take the lessons we've learned here together in this class, apply them to our lives to be better in our service to you. Father, please be with us now and keep us safe until we can come back together. And until then, help us to have eyes open for the opportunities to serve you and to serve one another. So, Jesus, that we pray. Amen. All right, we'll pick up there in verse number 10 next Lord's Day morning.